Good afternoon. I'm Community Development Committee Chair Robert Lilligren. Welcome to the regularly scheduled Community Development Committee meeting for the Met Council on Tuesday, September 20th, 2021. Before calling the meeting to order, just to remind folks that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. The Met Council Chair has determined it's not practical nor prudent to conduct in-person meetings at this time. Consequently, this meeting will be conducted by WebEx and recorded. Members of the public will be able to monitor this meeting by going to the agenda online to view the line stream of the meeting. The video is embedded there. I think we all kind of know the rules here by this time. So if there are no questions, I will call this meeting to order by asking Michelle to take attendance to establish a quorum. So Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, I will, Chair Lilligren. Thank you. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Lindstrom.
Here.
Musset.
Here.
Vento.
Here.
Wolf.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We have more than a quorum, ample attendance. Let's see, the first item on our agenda is the agenda. Members can see that posted at the website. If there's no objections or changes, we can move on to our business. Any objections or changes? Right. Hearing none, the next item is the minutes.
Excuse me, Chair Lilligren.
Oh, I'm
Councilmember
sorry.
Vento has her
Oh,
hand
you
up.
were blocked by my little screen. Okay, Councilmember Bento. Sorry.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. This does not require any kind of a change, but I do want to make a very brief announcement at the end of the meeting.
Sounds good. We will do that. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 7th Community Development Committee meeting. And is there a motion to approve?
Chambliss makes a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Thank you, council members. Any discussions, additions, corrections?
Excuse me, I didn't hear who's second.
It was Councilmember Lindstrom.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no discussion, Michelle, please call the roll on the minutes.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Musset.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That carries. And the next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. There is one item that staff has determined is not as routine and non-controversial. So I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is the City of Prior Lake Revere Way 17944 Revere Way Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Is there a motion to approve?
Wolf moves approval.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Vento seconds.
Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Michelle, please call the roll on the motion.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Musset.
Aye.
Vento.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That motion is adopted, and we are flying through our business. We have two informational items remaining on our agenda, interesting ones, which will likely spark a lot of good dialogue. The first is the 2022 Community Development Operating Budget update.
Excuse me, Chair
Oh,
Lilligren, we do have
Yeah.
a non-consent business item.
oh, my mistake.
227.
All right, I see it. Thank you. That's what you're here for, Michelle. Keep me on track. Appreciate it. I'm sorry. So moving on to our non-consent business item, 2021-227. It's a joint committees meeting and the same week. It's the third quarter budget amendment. And Heather Aagesen-Huebner will present. Welcome, Heather.
Right, thank you, Chair. Committee members, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so again, Heather Aagesen-Huebner, Finance Director for CD, and I'm here to ask that you authorize the Q3 budget amendment in accordance with the attached tables. As a brief reminder, you are authorizing tables 1 and 2, and table 3 is the detailed project information, and that is shared for transparency and informational purposes only. So for those of you that were at Transportation Committee, the CD budget is very similar. Q3 budgets tend to be fairly small, fairly modest, and our budget is the same. So I'm just going to highlight a couple items for you. So on the capital side, we're closing 9 projects and removing just under $5 million from our ACP. This is a routine closing of projects. The projects have been completed and those funds have been fully expended. On the operating and pass-through sections, you're going to see what are essentially some administrative cleanup items. These items were correct in the Q2 amendment as they passed the Community Development Committee, but then they were not included in the Management Committee and the Council. So we're just bringing those forward again. It's really just an administrative cleanup item. You've acted on it before, but to just make sure that we're seamless throughout the committee, Management Committee, and Council meeting, we've included those items again. Details of the administrative adjustment, those are the details that I mentioned before, can be found in attachment 3. These represent projects where funding has already been approved in the ACP through a previous budget amendment, and it's being programmed to specific projects. So for example, in this amendment, it includes 23 regional parks system equity grant projects that were awarded by the council in July. So just from a process perspective, we needed the money in the ACP as the first step to award those grants. Then the council acted to award this grant, and this is just the administrative process of programming those funds to the specific projects that you have already awarded. The remaining parks projects that you're going to see in the administrative adjustment sections are reallocating unused funding to specific projects or to undesignated accounts for future programming. Projects in this section have been reviewed for conformity with the Regional Parks Policy Plan and are in approved Parks and Trails Master Plan. Projects have been reviewed by the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. You're also going to see the first administrative adjustment we've seen for the Metro HRA. So this is similar to the parks projects. The funds have already been authorized in the ACP by you in a previous budget amendment, and we're just moving them to a specific project now. The Thrive outcome of stewardship has been supported through responsible planning and management of resources for the Community Development Division operating pass-through and capital programs. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Heather. Questions on that report? Committee members, any questions? Seeing none, I would ask for a motion to approve business item 2021-227.
Cummings moves approval.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Seeing none, Michelle, please call the roll.
Yes, Chair Lilligren. Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Musse,
Aye.
Bento,
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That item is adopted. And now we'll move on to our information items. The first item is the 2022 Community Development Operating Budget Update. And again, that will be presented by Heather Aagesen-Huebner. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. I'm going to give it just a minute for my presentation to pop up.
Sure. It builds up the anticipation.
It's so exciting.
Right. It's going to be a great one.
I
Thank
know
you.
I get excited by the budget, so we'll try to get a good story for you. So can I have the next slide, please? All right, so I'm here today really to just provide an overview of where we are at with the operating budget process, what conversations we've had, update you on a couple items, and really set the stage for some of the conversations that we're going to have yet in Q4. This is a slide that I always include with all my budget presentations. So just open invitation. If you see additional framing that you're looking for us to come to you with, we're happy to do this. We're always looking at what our regional role is. When I'm coming to you with a budget or the programs or budget conversations led by the program units are coming to you, we're always trying to bring data and research where we have it available. We're always trying to make sure that we're looking for equity impacts and then framing it in terms of what's going on in the region and how might the council support that work. And then we're always looking at, right now we're always looking at a couple budgets. We're looking at the council budget, we're looking at the state fiscal year budget, we're looking at the federal fiscal year budget. Sometimes those play well together, other times they don't. So we're always doing a lot of forecasting, both forwards and backwards. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk to you today is we have had some budget adjustments between the preliminary and the public. So I'll just give a quick highlight of what we thought was going to happen and what actually happened. We'll do a quick touch in on some budget conversations, either that are being led by the program units or by the budget group. There's a handful of initiatives that we want to give you an update on, and then we'll just lay out what the calendar looks like for the rest of this calendar year. Next slide, please. Okay, when I came and talked to you about the preliminary budget, there were a handful of changes that we thought were going to happen. The first is the Metro HRA. We have gotten additional federal money, which we've talked to you about in other presentations. We got some federal relief money. We got 200, and that part of that was 218 emergency vouchers. And there's the mobility demonstration program that we knew was coming. We also know that the HRA program, Terry Smith is going to be coming and talking to you about rent limits and small area fair market rent analysis. We knew that we assumed that the Livable Communities pass-through program was going to change. As a reminder, what that is when you award Livable Communities grants, they tend to be 3-year grants, and we do our budgeting on an annual cycle. So every year we take a look at what income is coming, what new income is coming in, and what the anticipated cash flow is for those multi-year grants. And then we'll program reserves accordingly. We were in the middle of the legislative session when the preliminary budget was due. So you're going to see a couple items in the parks pass-through account change. And then the division operating budget, we were having conversations at the time the preliminary budget was set about the 2050 regional development guide. So right now we have Thrive MSP 2040. The development guide is that next iteration. And we also always look at what our projects are, and we knew with COVID that some of the projects were going to go potentially a little slower than budgeted, and we may need to program money in 22 that we weren't going to spend in 21. Next slide, please. So here's what happened. We have added about $1.6 million to the Metro HRA budget. It's all federal funding. It is federal funding to support emergency housing vouchers, and we're also adding 6 FTE. Those will be used to support the caseload of the emergency vouchers and the new mobility demonstration program. There is a healthy amount of attrition within the Metro HRA. So we have federal funding certainty in the next couple of years. And should that money go away, natural attrition would allow us to get back to kind of our staffing levels where we're at right now. We also completed a cash flow analysis of the Livable Communities Pass-Through program. And to meet the annual cash flow, we added $14.7 million of reserves. That's not new money. It's just money that comes in every year, and we program it as the cash flow piece. On the parks pass-through, we had a really good legislative year. So there's $850 additional $1,000 that we programmed in the parks pass-through account. And just as a brief reminder, that'll get passed through to the parks implementing agencies via an established formula. And then we've added $350,000 to the division operating budget, and that's to do some of the early engagement, collaboration, planning, and research work building up to the 2050 regional development guide. So this is when you're looking at the preliminary to the public comment budget, this is really the changes that we have made. we are still really actively looking particularly at the Metro HRA for potentially changes between the public comment and the final adopted. And that's going to be really driven by federal funding. We just don't, I think as you remember, we always are really late in the year on what we know for the Metro HRA. It's just how the federal cycle works and how our calendar adjusts. So if we do make any changes, Terry or I will be back to tell you what we've changed and why we've changed it. But that's really kind of the one area in the CD budget to keep that we're keeping a closer eye on for any potential changes. Next slide, please. So here's the committee budget conversations that we laid out together at the beginning of the year. You know, we started with the regional snapshot and how it connects to Thrive MSP 2040. We've walked through the preliminary operating budget. We gave you one update on the Metro HRA mobility demonstration program in late summer. We're scheduled to probably come back to you in November, and that'll be led by HRA staff. Tonight, I'm going to give you some updates on some additional Metro HRA projects, specifically the City of Edina Housing Partnership and a couple other ones. I'm going to tee up a conversation about the Livable Communities Home Ownership Pilot Program, which Tara is going to talk about in depth next. And then we have a handful of other conversations that are really going to happen in Q4. Again, these are really just how the calendar hits, and I'll recap these again later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a lot going on with Metro HRA from a budget perspective, so that's really what I'm going to focus on. So I think, you know, we know we've come to you with the City of Edina Housing Partnership. There is an agreement signed. When you passed the business item to execute and move forward with that partnership with the City of Edina, one of the following actions that we had anticipated we would need is a budget amendment. We had assumed at that point in time that the funds would be brought into the council budget and then we would purchase the homes. There's just a different process that's going to happen, and it looks like the money is never going to touch the council's books. It's going to go straight from the City of Edina to a title company. So when that happens, we don't need a formal budget amendment action. So just if you're wondering why you're not going to see a formal budget amendment coming back, that's why. We're going to keep an eye on it because there's some rehabilitation work that may be done with some of those houses. We don't think that money is going to touch the council books right now. It might go directly to a contractor from the City of Edina. But if it will touch our books, then we'll need to come back to you with an amendment. But right now, it looks like we're not going to need one. Terry had also talked to you about the fact that we were going to come up with a home purchase and disposition policy. So if there were a small handful of homes that we wanted to sell and we wanted to purchase other ones, that we were going to come back to you. And that would have a budget impact at some point in time. What's happening right now is the real estate department has been working with partners and they're developing a council policy on that now. So kind of the first step that's going to happen is we anticipate that policy will be brought back to you as a council in late 21, and then we'll have the budget conversations after the council acts on that policy, and we'll work through what those with the budget and financial implications are. I would imagine it would be, you know, as simple as what we did with the last home purchase. You know, we would bring money in through an authorized capital program if we sold a property, and then we would expend out of that account if we were going to purchase a new one. We've also, as you know, have had a lot going on with federal funding with the Metro HRA. So the mobility demonstration grant, it's a 6-year grant, and the first year is really geared to be a planning year, and we're still in the planning phase. So it would not surprise me if early next year we come to you with a budget amendment to bring additional federal operating money into our operating budget. But we just don't know enough yet to be able to say with certainty what that dollar amount is going to be. So we're just going to hold on that for right now. We're also continuing to plan on those emergency vouchers. So there's, again, 218 vouchers, and we're going to continue to figure out, the HRA staff are working really hard to issue those vouchers. And we're keeping an eye on our federal budget really closely. There's just a lot changing. We got a lot of federal aid up front, and in some cases, if we're not spending all the money, then HUD will come back and actually take some of it back, and the money kind of goes back and forth. And we're just really tracking what's going on closely. And once we kind of figure out where things are settling, we'll probably come back and just give you a holistic update on that. So just know right now there's a lot going on, and we're tracking all the moving pieces.
Thanks, Heather. Councilmember Lee has a question. Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I have a question about page 5, that slide. You note the 6 new FTEs, and just kind of curious question into the weeds. Is that because of any of the budget items that you just mentioned, or is there a particular impetus? And why is the number 6 instead of maybe 5 or 7?
Chair, council members. So I see that Terry is on here. I'm going to give it my answer, and then Terry, if I misstate this, I'm going to ask you to pop on for me quick. So 4 of those FTEs are with that mobility demonstration program. It was part of what the commitment was to get that program up and going, and that money will be funded with the Fed. So as part of a grant application. And the other 2 are to keep up with the new caseload with those initial emergency vouchers. They take a lot of outreach. There's just a lot of paperwork, a lot of processing, and a lot of staff work goes into trying to make sure that our voucher holders are successful finding a home to rent.
Oh,
Ms.
thanks.
Smith, anything to add, Terry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lee. Just one thing to add is one of the things we're working really deeply with HUD on right now is our staffing for the mobility counseling program. So Heather is right that we're anticipating needing to hire new staff to be the coaches that work directly with the participants and finding new units and providing supports to those families. So the exact number of FTEs is not super clear, but we're getting there. But yes, and then the emergency housing voucher. So that's accurate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions at this point? Hearing and seeing none. Heather, please.
Sure. Could we go to the next slide, please? There we go. Okay, so one of the processes that you as council members go through every year is awarding some general purposes levy funds for new initiatives. There was some conversation by council members last year about when in the process to bring it up to the committee level, so we wanted to bring this to you early. So I don't want to talk too much in depth because that's the whole second info item tonight. But there is a pilot project, affordable home ownership pilot that is being discussed and looked at. There's 3 different potential funding sources that we've identified. One is the 2022 LHIA base budget. 2 is there's some interest earnings that we could program. And 3, there's the council strategic initiative conversation that you have every year, and that would be funded with general purposes levy money. Again, and I'm going to maybe hold comments here. I'll be on the line if there's question. So Tara will lead this conversation. I'll be in the background if any funding questions come up that Tara is not able to field. Next slide, please. So here's what's next up. In October and November, there's going to be an info and then an action item on the Metro HRA rent limits. I'm going to be back before you on October 3rd to talk about the capital program. And we have a number of items identified for the Q4. One is Parks Future Reimbursement Consideration Program. Just as a quick reminder, there were some IRS guidelines that is driving us to change how the future reimbursement program works, and it's essentially paused right now. We have a meeting with all the parks, and we've met individually with 8 of the 10 parks implementing agencies, and we're meeting with them as a group on Thursday. So we want to hear what they have to say. And then we'll likely be back in front of you Q4, if not early Q1. As I mentioned earlier, the HRA home purchase and disposition policy will likely be coming to you in Q4. We'll be talking a little bit more specifically about the CD role supporting the MCUB program and how we stay in really close contact with procurement and what we see in our 22 budget that may be good candidates for MCUB work. We'll also be talking to you in more detail about the 2050 Regional Development Guide. That timing is pretty flexible, and that's going to be primarily a programmatic conversation. The only reason I have it up here is we've added that additional $350,000 for this year. And then we're going to continue, our HRE staff will continue to talk with you about the Metro HR moving to work designation. Next slide. And that's what I have for you today. I'd be happy to take any feedback or answer any questions you may have.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Questions on that report, Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Heather. This is an outstanding overview, and it's really, really useful and helpful information. This is really just a question of curiosity. The federal funding that is coming through, of course, is life-saving and terrific and all of those things. I'm wondering, however, you know, staff is so stretched and working in such challenging circumstances and environments and working from home and all of those things. Is this just hugely taking up staff time to, I'm not saying there shouldn't, obviously, I'm just curious to apply, to track the funds, to do the reporting on a federal level. I know that, you know, from my other work in government, it's so sometimes these programs can be very time consuming and challenging. So I'm just curious how you are all weathering, and I thank you for weathering it, because we need the funding and it will be fabulous, but it also is very challenging to staff, I should think. So I'm just curious.
So Chair, Council members, I'll answer a really short snippet, and then I'm going to defer to Terry, because really a lot of this work is on Terry and her team. I would say from a financial perspective, you know, if you're, one of the questions we always ask when we're looking at money is the administrative work worth the additional money? And I can tell you in this case, it absolutely is. And it carries all of the gifts and the burdens that come along with additional money. We anticipate we're going to have additional financial audits, which is going to take a toll. There's additional planning meetings. There's all the additional work you would imagine. And I guess I'll hand off to Terry, because while the financial team carries some of that, the bulk of that really sits with Terry and her team.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings. Heather's absolutely right. It's an incredible amount of work to take on new programs. The emergency housing vouchers are brand new, and we're thrilled that we got 218 additional vouchers. But there's a lot of work to get those placed in the community in a short amount of time. They also come with more tracking and more reporting strings than any vouchers we've ever seen. So we're thrilled to get service funding for the first time that's connected to vouchers. It's incredibly time consuming to track all those costs. You know, we're setting up reporting requirements and measures and those sorts of things. For the mobility demonstration program, again, it's an incredible administrative lift. We're in the throes of planning for that program. So Stephanie and I are spending lots and lots of time in meetings along with some of our outreach staff with the HUD and the technical assistance providers to get the program details worked out. And because it's a brand new program, HUD doesn't really have all the answers. So we're learning every single day as we go. And you know, funding is a big part of it. And with both the emergency housing vouchers and the mobility demonstration vouchers, it's about providing additional supports to voucher families to ensure success. And so if we can be part of helping HUD learn how important those supports are, it may benefit us in the long run, because maybe, you know, supports will be funded permanently in the future. Now I'm just making that up, but that's certainly a hope of ours. So lots of work on the front end to get benefit on the back end, but yes, and that's why we're hiring additional staff for the emergency vouchers, because our staff are already tapped to the max and are at capacity, and so taking on additional programs requires additional staffing.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, Councilmember Cummings.
Just a quick follow-up comment. I just again want to express my deep gratitude to everyone on the staff, and particularly you two who just spoke, and your teams, because it is an extraordinary, unexpected additional workload that you probably didn't need. And yes, it will benefit so many people, but your ability to pivot and figure out how we can not just take advantage of these funds, but get them into the community where they belong as quickly as possible is really terrific. And I thank you for all that you are doing. That's all. Thanks.
Agree, Councilmember. Well said. Thank you. Further questions on the report? 2022 CD budget report.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Wolf. Thank you. Yep.
I didn't know if you
Councilmember.
could see me
You're at
raising
the
my
bottom
hand
of
or
my
not.
screen, so I was getting down there. So yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
So it's not a question so much as giving some background to council members who haven't been here for ages and ages and ages like I have. This whole strategic initiatives, the council strategic initiatives money thing is not a long-standing tradition. It's when I first came to the council, the general fund levy was used primarily to fund regional administration. And partway through the Dayton administration, actually fairly early on in the Dayton administration council, they started putting more and more of the regional administration budget into the division budgets to free up extra money for these initiatives. And it was a gradual process where that got to be a larger and larger pool of money. And then there was some concern that that was going to have to go away because of the pressures of the transit capital levy. And now our transit system is in disarray due to the pandemic, and we have all this different federal money. So I don't know how that's going to go long term. But the whole idea of having this sort of slush fund for council initiatives where we get to sit around and decide how to spend it is relatively new, started under the Dayton administration and now continued under the Waltz administration, just for your information. I still don't know how I really feel about that. It seems kind of weird to me that we get to just sit around and pick how to spend money, but wanted to let you guys know that it's relatively new.
Thanks for the background, Councilmember. Further discussion on the report, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was thinking the same things. So I'm always glad when Councilmember Wolf says sometimes what's in my head, probably good. She says she doesn't say what sometimes is in my head. But you know, we had actually, when I was president of the League of Cities, the same kind of thing started to happen where there was a president's initiative. And I think it was to address some, you know, critical things that were taking place in the moment. And then it kind of stayed on, which is fine. An organization can decide that. But I was kind of wondering again, the history of this. So thanks for bringing that up. So I would like to know too, if this is going to be something that stays, I think we should put some parameters around that, or, you know, some goals or levels of, you know, critical need or something like that, that first must be met, so that we're kind of ensuring there's some consistency perhaps year over year in how we meet out the funds or decide where we're going to put it. Certainly there have been no shortage of crises with COVID and everything, but just from a policy perspective only, I appreciate Councilmember Wolf's comments, and I have really enjoyed being able to put some of the money in housing, of course, considering the state of housing that we are in right now. But I was kind of looking for some guidelines around how we apply this, when we apply this, and things like that. So maybe, you know, if anybody can catch their breath without adding more work to staff in a large level, I would just support looking at some parameters in the future so that we've got a little bit of structure around it, should it continue and become kind of a standing initiative.
Thank you, Councilmember. Did you want a staff comment on that or a response, Councilmember?
Well, I don't really need one. It's just
Okay.
more of a policy question. When money pops up in a budget, you know, everything else
Yep.
is so restricted by, you know, how it's coming in, and rightfully so. But, you know, it might just be good that we have some parameters generally around money that
Great.
we at a whim get to do some good things with.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the 2022 budget report, Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with, I really appreciate Councilmember Wolf's history on this. It always is so helpful. And I agree with much of what Councilmember Johnson said, but I would caution us on getting too detailed and too defined in how we go forward, because I think one of the benefits of this kind of a opportunity is the nimbleness of it. And particularly during an uncertain time as we're in now with the pandemic, if we were to get too structured and too detailed, it could limit future councils and require them to pause and rethink. And the same, it could do it to us. So I like the nimbleness of it. And I think that's particularly important when we're talking about housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion or questions on the 2022 Community Development Budget Report? Further questions? Seeing none, I agree, Heather, this is great work. Thanks to you and all the people that also contributed to this. And yeah, and we'll see you again before the end of the year. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
So we will move on to our final agenda item for the evening, which is the Local Housing Incentives Account, LHIA.
Mr. Chair, do we need a vote on that, or did we do that already?
I'm sorry, on what's that, Councilmember Johnson? On the last item?
Yeah, that was just information, right?
Just information only. Yep.
Okay, thank you,
No
Mr. Chair.
action required. Yep, and this one is information as well. So it's the LHIA Affordable Home Ownership pilot program that Heather just touched on briefly, and we have staff here to present, and starting the presentation will be Ashleigh Johnson to kick off. So welcome, Ashleigh.
Thank you, Councilmember Lilligren. And thank you, committee. Good afternoon. Tara and I are back to further discuss the LHIA Affordable Homeownership pilot. We were here in April and got great feedback from the committee, and we've done some work since then, and we love to hear your thoughts and ideas. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, I will first give a brief overview of the pilot, its objectives and priorities, and then Tara and I will share a few initial options for program design for the committee's feedback. Following our program design discussion, we'd like to then discuss funding availability and next steps for the pilot. So next slide, please. So the pilot that we are proposing in LHIA, as discussed this past April, is intended to prioritize affordable homeownership opportunities in communities and with populations that are underserved. So specifically, and this is the first priority listed on the slide, in communities that offer primarily single-family housing and also very few affordable homeownership opportunities. Aligning with the second priority listed on the slide, we also discussed last April that we are proposing the pilot in communities with worse racial disparities in homeownership than the regional average, yet have significant populations of Black and Indigenous households or other households of color. Next slide, please. So for the first part of our program design discussion, we'll discuss our recommendations for program eligibility. The pilot will be under the Local Housing Incentives account, and as guided by statute, that means that to be eligible to apply, cities must also be Livable Communities Act participants or LCA participants. And in statute, that requires a dollar-for-dollar match of the grant award. Since LHIA is specifically for affordable housing, proposals would need to be affordable to households earning 80% of the area median income, AMI, or less, which translates to about $78,500 a year for a family of four. And then finally, while not required by statute, staff recommends similar threshold criteria as other LHIA programs. So that means that there would be a minimum affordability term of 15 years and that homeowners be set up for success by utilizing first-time homebuyer education when applicable. Next slide, please. So the pilot will be available to all communities participating in LCA. But as for our discussion today, we are proposing a program design that offers two ways to be considered for funding. And we are also recommending a pre-qualification component, and we like your feedback and ideas on this. So that means that cities with the most potential to achieve one or both pilot priorities would meet pre-qualification factors to apply. However, other LCA participating cities could certainly also apply. They would just have to demonstrate how their proposal achieves the objective of first creating affordable home ownership opportunities in communities and populations where it is least available in a similar way that those pre-qualified cities do. And Tara will dig into this a little bit more, what we're thinking about in terms of pre-qualification and ways that a proposal could meet one or both the geographic and the disparity priorities. Next slide, please.
Great, thanks, Ash. Perfect. So these pre-qualification factors, really what we mean by that is simply more specific eligibility beyond kind of the headline eligibility that would, get at these pilot priorities. So what are we proposing for these pre-qualification factors? Using a variety of data sources, staff have identified communities in which the pilot's objectives could most effectively be most effectively addressed in the regional context. So it was tempting to consider additional factors given the complexity of the housing market and the many, many needs in the region, but our goal has been to distill the pilot's focus to the most concise set of criteria possible. As a reminder, the council can still award LHIA funding to affordable homeownership applications that are submitted to Minnesota Housing's consolidated request for proposals. And though that RFP does include priorities similar to what we're talking about here, they're just a couple of many, many, many priorities. And so they don't end up having the same kind of specific focus in terms of kind of who's applying and who's rising to the top of funding awards. So by design, this pilot's intended to provide a very targeted focus so that outcomes can be clearly measured and tracked against the goal of serving underserved communities and populations. So to that end, the first of the pre-qualification factors is to identify communities, as Ash said, where single-family homes are the dominant housing choice and median sale prices are more than $25,000 above the regional average. That filter, using our data, yields 21 communities that are either current or anticipated LCA participants. Most are emerging suburban edge communities, but there are communities from all 7 counties on this list. Proposals from these 21 communities meeting those other generic kind of eligibility requirements that Ashleigh covered would automatically be considered for funding. Next slide. So pre-qualification factors for the other pilot priority would also start with a geographic focus. We identified cities in the region that have similar or higher shares of Black, Indigenous, or other residents of color as the region, yet higher homeownership disparities than the region, which are also already very, very high. Put another way, to identify where the pilot would have the best chance of creating affordable homeownership opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and other households of color, we've identified cities that are already home to a significant share of this underserved population, yet enjoy very few affordable homeownership opportunities. So using that filter, the data yields 16 cities that are currently or expected to soon be participants in LCA. Most are urban or suburban communities, and they represent 5 of the 7 counties in the region. Only one city, which is a rural center community, ends up pre-qualifying under both the geographic choice and racial equity criteria. So for the most part, these 2 priorities are fairly exclusive. Next slide, please. An additional pre-qualification factor for the racial equity priority would be to ensure a minimum effort is made to reach home buyers of color. If proposals don't make affirmative efforts to reach Black, Indigenous, and other underserved households of color, the outcomes of the pilot could follow the same discriminatory patterns that are reflected in our current homeownership rates. Therefore, staff have been curating best practices when it comes to serving home buyers of color. We're proposing that there be a minimum score for use of these or other presented strategies that can attract homebuyers of color. And that would also need to be achieved, a minimum score in that context, to meet the pre-qualification factors for funding consideration. We would provide a checklist and technical assistance for all our known best practices for applicants to consider, and would review other strategies offered by the applicants as well. Proposals meeting the geographic criteria in the previous slide and a minimum score for that outreach criteria would then move on to be considered for funding. To be clear, there would not be a requirement that the affordable homeownership opportunities we fund serve BIPOC households. Rather, we're intending to ensure that underserved households of color are given equitable access to the homeownership opportunities that we're funding. And again, all communities would be able to apply, all LCA participating communities. But proposals that meet these pre-qualification factors and the initial eligibility piece would be considered for funding with no additional effort. Proposals that didn't meet the pre-qualification factors would have to demonstrate how they're achieving the pilot objectives in a similar way as the pre-qualified proposal. Next slide, please. So once we determined which proposals would be considered for funding through a variety of any of those mechanisms we just discussed, then we would evaluate all applications using the same criteria. Consistent with other LCA programs criteria and criteria in many other affordable housing opportunity funding sources in the region, we do evaluate efforts to increase participation across underserved populations generally. Using, once again, we're proposing that checklist of best practices for reaching populations with significantly lower rates of homeownership than white households. Since regional disparities in homeownership are among the highest in the nation, regardless of whether an application is focused on the geographic choice priority or the racial equity priority, additional efforts to serve BIPOC households is necessary to ensure equitable access to the homes we fund. In this stage of evaluation, however, it would not be used to determine if a minimum score had been met, but fully scored and evaluated competitively across all the proposals. We would also score projects for a few other key factors like addressing unique local needs. And again, the new equity considerations data is super helpful in us understanding, along with, of course, conversations with our partners in local government, what unique needs in their community are. You know, Black, Indigenous, and households of color is not a one size fits all, and there's a lot of unique situations in each community that need to be addressed directly. So that would be something we would definitely want to capture in the scoring and prioritize in the applications. Depth of affordability is something that we're feeling at this point should also be evaluated. In the kind of generic eligibility slide, Ash mentioned a minimum requirement of 15 years of affordability, but there are a variety of affordable homeownership models that provide many, many more years than that, or even perpetual affordability. And so for how long and how many households the affordable homeownership opportunity could serve, we think that should also be something that allowed for you know, some stronger competition in an application. And finally, the depth of affordability. So, you know, to be affordable, we're saying that the proposals would have to be affordable at 80% AMI, but we do know that households can successfully own homes at much lower incomes than 80% AMI. And so to the extent that some of the programs out there can and do serve households below 80% AMI, we would want to, you know, consider them with a little bit more competitive feature as well. So we will be coming back to you with more details about scoring criteria, actual scoring criteria, and you know, proposed point values and how we would consider funding recommendations to y'all later this year. But we wanted to just share the kind of the framework and the high level criteria and kind of structure that that we've, you know, that we're at right now for your feedback. And please feel free to jump in at any time, but we do have a couple more slides, and then we'll have kind of a slide full of questions for that feedback. Next slide, please, Greg. So last but not least, we will toss out our early thoughts on funding, and Heather Aagesen-Huebner did key that up for me very well, and I really appreciate that. She mentioned that the LHIA base budget or some portion of the statutorily defined $1.5 million could be considered for this pilot. I'll note that, you know, for many years, the council has augmented the LHI base budget with those reserve funds that Heather mentioned, or I'm sorry, interest earnings she mentioned, or sometimes special initiatives funding. And so it's been a really long time, basically, since we've only made 1.5 million available for all of LHIA. And to just be frank, I think if that were the only LHIA funding we had in a year, I think that would probably be a tough year to try this pilot out, because that's, you know, only a drop in the bucket in the really important multifamily funding selections we make with our funding through the Minnesota Housing Consolidated RFP. But that is a potential funding source, is that base budget amount. The LCA interest earnings, of course, we learn more about what is available a little bit closer to the end of the year usually, and some of those, preceding the final vote of funding availability, that's usually in February. So I'm hoping with a little more specificity, we can talk about what is available to program through those interest earnings and what role that could potentially play in funding the pilot. And then finally, the special initiatives, which were, of course, a topic of conversation in the prior presentation as well. Given this is a pilot, given that we are acknowledging that this is trying something new and we don't know for sure exactly how it will pan out, we'll be evaluating it and looking at it closely as we consider kind of, what funding would look like longer term if this was deemed a success and we decided to continue the pilot. But if for this first year we wanted to look at special initiatives funding, if you all wanted to look at special initiative funding, depending on how much is available to you, that's another potential source. Next slide. So how much money are we going to ask for? Boy, this is tough. This is art and science, as I mentioned before. So, we looked at estimated average awards per unit, looking at past years of funding awards made through the Super RFP for single family projects. We also considered the fact that LHIA funding requires a dollar for dollar match, although there are ways to meet that match that do not equate to direct funding into the project. So it doesn't automatically mean that if we subsidize, if we offered $100,000 in subsidy, there's automatically actually a $200,000 subsidy for a single family home. But we wanted to go a little bit, we wanted to estimate a little bit higher than kind of the average single family funding award, because we are by design kind of trying to create a pilot that will create homeownership opportunities that are affordable in areas where it's proven to be really tough, or for populations that have not had as much access to affordable housing or homeownership opportunities as everyone else. So we kind of wanted to be a little bit on the conservative side and not sell ourselves too short and estimate an average award of $100,000 per unit. Our goal for 2022, Ash and I have been meeting individually with a couple dozen cities that are current participants, and especially those cities that fall into that pre-qualification factor criteria. And really, obviously they can't guarantee they would be submitting an application, and it can be really hard to guess how many units would be funded. But based on kind of our estimation of folks' interest and their own funding that they would potentially be able to match with, we think anywhere between 10 and 30 units is a reasonable kind of estimate for what we could expect in the pilot year. And so we struck down the middle there and said, what if our goal for 2022 is 20 homes? So at $100,000 a unit, 20 homes, where we're just kind of sitting right now for discussion would be a recommended funding amount for 2022 of $2 million. And I do think that less than $2 million would be still worth funding. I do think there is a level of funding under which, it's probably not the best, the most efficient use of our time to fund. I don't know exactly what that number threshold is, but we can kind of talk about that. But just, for discussion purposes, this is kind of where we've landed today. And I will say, next slide, please, Greg, and turn it back over to Ash to queue up the questions. But of course, we welcome any and all feedback.
Yeah, so questions for the committee. So we wanted to throw out a few questions to get the discussion going, but feel free to ask questions based on what you've heard so far. Some samples are the threshold factors that we discuss on these slides. When we talk about pre-qualified cities, is that on target? Does the proposed scoring framework adequately capture or accurately capture the intent of the pilot? Do you all have any feedback on the direction about the funding options, or what have we or haven't we considered? Let me pull up.
Pardon my interruption, Ash. I think we should sit on this slide for the
Okay.
discussion. I'm guessing that's what you were hesitating on.
Yeah.
If that's okay, Mr. Chair, we'll sit here and we do have one more slide about next steps, but that's probably best after the discussion period.
Right, sounds good. Discussion on this report and especially focusing around these questions. And thanks, Tara and Ashley, for your work on this and your teams as well. I think we can see it really coming together through our conversations here. So very cool. Discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair, and just second that. It's clear that the two of you have put in a ton of work and a ton of thought into this, and that's coming through loud and clear. And two thumbs up for connecting with all of the various groups that I know you did, including did I hear over a dozen cities? I think a lot of cities, and I'm curious to know. I assume their feedback is positive, or else you wouldn't be bringing it back here today. But can you summarize a little bit? Some were really excited. They were cautiously optimistic. Kind of give me the lay of the land on their feedback.
Yeah, so I can definitely jump in on that. So generally, we got some feedback on two kind of spectrums. Many of the cities that I got the pleasure to discuss the pilot with shared that they had concerns about land costs and if it was even possible to consider a pilot like this in their community. So we wanted them to, throw a number out there like, okay, so if, would 100,000 be okay? Like, could you match that? Because with the higher LHIA pilot awards, that means higher local match. So those were the kind of high level discussions in some of the communities that we spoke with was land costs are exorbitant. Houses are selling for between, $500,000 to $1 million. Is this even possible? On the other spectrum, there were some cities that considered themselves affordable already. Some said that, hey, we don't really have any affordable housing goals. We have a mix of price ranges. There are like $150,000 houses available and fixer uppers. So they really wanted us to kind of give examples of, okay, so in a city where, hey, I consider my city to already have affordable housing, where might this pilot fit? And that was, really for like a little difficult for us to discuss. And we really depended on some of the baseline data that staff was able to pull to have a discussion on, okay, prices or houses are selling at this price point. They may not be available at certain AMIs. So that was really great to have those discussions. Communities also talked about hoping to have things like 2 application periods, or they expressed having struggles with previously applied for LCA funding, primarily LCDA, and being turned down, and feeling like they struggled to meet certain requirements, and general sentiment that LCA is hard to compete for. And that definitely carried over to assumptions about LHIA. So they were saying, so would this pilot not be accessible to my community because I don't have these transit options, or because, we don't have this kind of density, or so we really had to share about LHIA as it is, as it's existing, and then furthermore talk about what we mean by geographic priority. And a lot of the discussions about racial disparities in homeownership in some communities was easier, especially for me, to have than other communities. However, people seem generally behind the idea of, hey, we'd like these affordable home ownership opportunities in our community. We're willing to try out the pilot anyway, but we might need a little bit of help when it comes to targeting or reaching out to developers, or kind of framing what it means to partner and try to like reduce disparities in home ownership. So they expressed challenges, but they were willing, if the council was willing, to help them through what this pilot could be. And Tara, feel free to jump in based on your conversations, but that's kind of like the gist or overview of mine.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was
please.
great, Ash. Thank you. And we did divvy them up, so so I can report kind of on mine. And like Ash, there was quite a spectrum, right? There was one community I spoke to that I felt like they just won the lotto because they had just been working on a single family home ownership, or it doesn't have to be single family, but a home ownership program led by the city, a city land trust that would be funded by their HRA, and especially since the city's already considering putting money into it, it basically felt like now we can get that matched, you know, and told me more about the pilot that they're looking at and how closely it aligned with ours. And I had no idea. So that was a really great conversation, right? Other cities were, you know, really lauded the attempt and expressed deep interest, and really felt like their staff capacity was going to be the big question. Even more, I was a little interested in my conversations, even more than the how do we come up with match, because Ash and I worked real hard to, you know, be creative and flexible and talk to them about ways that match could be met that, you know, weren't cutting a check. Was this, how do I, you know, okay, you know, there's a development partner, but you know, it's not nothing on staff to apply for these and administer these and be, you know, submit the grant forms and work with the developer. And so that is an issue as well. I'll just offer as a last thought again, you know, we set a goal of 20 homes in the entire region. So, you know, I think that there are definitely communities that, you know, it would be harder to find a couple units than others. But I do think there's some low-hanging fruit out there when we're only talking about 20 units. And so, and if it succeeds, then we have really strong, you know, evidence to go back to the cities that express kind of some interest, but some hesitation, and we'll just learn on that and build on that and hopefully increase momentum and interest over time.
Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom. Is that it? Well, Tara or Ash, you please remind me, what is the term of the pilot? How long?
Mr. Chair, we've really only come up with a year.
Okay, well,
So
20
we
in a
would,
year.
yep. So we would put this
Cool.
in the 2022 package of LCA program distribution. It would become another program in that fund distribution plan for all the LCA programs that we're usually putting before you in February, after a couple of additional informational items where we talk about, you know, changes we might be proposing across all the programs. But that would just make that year available, that funding available for that year. And then we would, you know, be building in evaluation and conversation with you all to talk about, you know, does it continue or not?
Great, thank you. So I have in queue Councilmember Chambliss and Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. I really appreciate the background work that staff have put into presenting this pilot, and going to the cities to see what their interests and their challenges are is very valuable. You know, if we read the paper and we try to see where we're at in terms of the pandemic, pre-pandemic, and what might be forecasted for post-pandemic, we can expect a lot of challenges for home ownership. The rising cost of housing for everybody is threatening to make the home ownership disparity gap even larger, which is very troubling for an entire economy, which could take a hit. So the more proactive we can be to strengthen our home ownership, the stronger economy that we will have in ecosystem. So kudos on this, having a pilot that we can proactively learn from and benefit these communities and make a difference where we are one of the worst states in the nation in terms of homeownership gaps for underserved communities. This is very important to have a pilot like this and get it right. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with everything that's been said. Good questions and thoughts. And I sit on the housing work group, so I really, really enjoy it. You know, working with a handful of council members and staff, kind of noodling this stuff through, and applaud both Ash and Tara for all the great work. So with this as a one-year project, the 15-year affordability covenant will be in there no matter what, if the pilot moves forward or not, correct? Okay, I see your heads nodding. And then, so I just, one thing is, when people move into a home, great, they're there, they got it. I just know that I've had experience too, where we had certain time limits on the affordability, and then a crisis or some moment happens in a family's life, and they are having to move before that term would expire, or especially if it's a lifetime covenant on a property. So just want to be mindful of what some off ramps could be for people that demonstrate there's a real need for something happening in their life, so that they don't actually have a financial setback or a hurdle that would cause them, you know, just, I guess, a situation that would not be ideal for them. And then two, if we see that, we can find that sweet spot where this works in whatever community, just figuring out how to bring other partners in with the data and work that we're collecting around the pilot, so that we can scale it, because, this is a tremendous amount of money in a good way, right? I mean, to close the gap, but it's a tremendous amount of money that would have to be raised in scalable fashion, right? So certainly the Met Council could keep putting on its own the money behind it, but I think our goal would be to show other partners that have resources to get in on this too. So I applaud the work, and just always looking out though for those caveats or those things, so that the families, the people that we're trying to impact positively, don't have that unintended consequence along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I would also note that Councilmember Lee put a comment in the chat that he likes the pre-qualified criteria, and he agrees with the profile. In a post-recession world, poverty and housing insecurity has become more of a sprawling reality outside the core cities. So thank you for that comment. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate Councilmember Johnson's comments. And I also kind of want to channel something that Linnea Atlas Ingebrigtsen said quite some time ago, about that homeownership is not a path to prosperity for everybody. I mean, we just have to look back to the 2000s and see people who got into the housing market right before the crash and lost everything. And it was that hit disproportionately fell upon people in the inner city and low income and BIPOC people. So I guess I want to be mindful that perhaps right now might not be the ideal time to do this kind of a project, because we have had a huge uptick in home prices. And the last time we had that was right before the Great Recession, when everything crashed. And so the people who lost were the ones that were buying in a market that's like it is right now. There's a delay in when this would actually happen, even if we authorize it. But I had asked Tara earlier today, what happens if the market continues to be inappropriate for this sort of an investment? Can we say no? And we still have through February to decide whether or not we wanted to do this on the timeline that they have. The other thing that I spoke with Hra earlier about was, if you did the 100,000 for one unit for 15 years of affordability, and the city provides the $100,000 match, that's over $1,100 a month for a unit. So that's a really bad return on investment in terms of affordability. And Tara assured me that that wasn't the standard, that's the minimum, was that they would have to have 15 years, but that longer was better, and getting maybe a smaller amount if it's only for 15 years affordability was probably what would happen. So I feel a little better about that. I guess if we do this, I think the land trust model sort of a thing is probably the safest for everybody concerned, because that's that perpetual affordability, and you share the risk with the homeowner if the market does die, so it's not quite as risky. And it's affordable for the next person, which is good, because if you buy a house and you're stretched and you can't do any upgrades on that house, 10 years later, it's not going to have the value that it had, because everything deteriorates. And I have two people in my neighborhood who, one of them does minimal outside updates, and the inside is probably needing to be condemned. But I have another neighbor whose deck fell off and has squirrels living in the walls of the house. And that house is not going to sell for anything if he ever decides to move out. So, you know, when you're stretched to buy a house, and then you have to try to afford tools and supplies and everything to maintain it, we've got to be careful in what we're setting people up for. And in that respect, a home ownership of townhomes with an association taking care of the outside is also safer for the people who are getting into the program, because then you only have to worry about taking care of the inside of your house, and everybody's outside is taken care of. So just my thoughts. Oh, one more thing. I would absolutely not use base LHIA funding for this, because that is a very big need that we can't walk away from in favor of home ownership. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. Further discussion and structure on the questions, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like very much the idea behind this program. But it kind of piggybacking on what Councilmember Wolf has said, you know, home ownership, you don't just walk in, buy a home, own it, and ta-da. Would there be guidance for individuals who may be purchasing their first home on the responsibility involved and what it takes to actually own a home and how to plan around that? I think we have to be really aware of that, so that the individual can be, or individuals can be successful in what they're purchasing. I think we also have to be, I would guess, since this is a pilot program, and similar to earlier discussion today, everyone is stretched right now. And so I think that there will need to be a lot of hand-holding, explaining to the cities and the municipalities that might participate in this program how to apply successfully. If February is like tomorrow, so it's not that far out if we decide to do this, and we want the program to be successful, because I think it has huge upside. But I would caution that we get our I's dotted and our T's crossed before we launch, so that we don't launch something that winds up having unintended consequences that either the cities or the individuals are having difficulty being successful. I think that's an issue. And then I too thought about, so this would not have to be a single family home. It could be a duplex townhouse, or something like that as well. Is that correct? Okay.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cummings, yes, it could be any home ownership opportunity.
Okay, great. I really like the idea behind the program, but I just would caution that we be careful as we enter into it, because it is a lot of money and has potential to do a lot of good, but also has potential to trip up and make things more challenging, rather than offering the opportunity that we hope will happen. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Councilmember. Very helpful. Further comments or discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. This has been a very rich conversation with a lot of really good questions, comments, and concerns from all of our council members, and even the staff and the cities. I'm really glad that we have the education component included with the pilot, where we can talk about, you know, the importance of getting a home that's affordable based on a person's income, having conversations about financial security and how to properly prepare and manage, not just getting into the house, but you know, down the line, what your homeowner association expectations are, what a typical homeowner neighbor expectation is in terms of upkeep, you know, the lawn, the trim, those basic things, and preparing for a house that's older or newer. There are differences in maintenance costs early on. So if we model after some of the existing home buyer education programs, and we have many, and I'm sure that we will do that, we have a better chance of success.
Great.
Oh, and I also wanted to say something about the security aspects and the challenges that, you know, the average homeowner is expecting with a pandemic or a change in the stock market or things like that. It can affect everyone. Unfortunately, it affects people of color the worst when we do have swings in our market. And so having those kind of discussions is important. We shouldn't eliminate the opportunity because of the challenges, but we should certainly make sure that we're as best prepared and that we can train and educate people so that there's fewer financial emergencies and even having some, conversations about you know, the financial management aspects of it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a question on the eligibility of the potential folks that are purchasing homes. Is that up to the cities that participate, or is that up to us? Meaning they could be minimum credit scores or income limits or purchase price requirements or down payment or whatever it might be. Is that up to us to set that and the cities have to abide by that or not?
Ms. Johnson, Ms. Beard?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, you know, all members of the committee, there's a lot new and different about this pilot, but at its core, it's something we do every year when we award single family projects through Minnesota Housing Super RFP. In terms of our grants administration staff reaching out to the cities who have to agree to accept the grant on behalf of the project, but very rarely are the developers of the project. And, you know, monitor things that were said in the application that we need to make sure are met, and absolutely build into pieces of the application process, you know, questions that get at exactly these types of criteria. I would never go so far as to claim that we have the same amount of you know, staff capacity as Minnesota Housing to evaluate single family, you know, evaluations at the level that they receive them. But I will say that we have learned a lot in being their partner over the years in terms of what to put into an application to ensure that an affordable homeownership opportunity is carried out in a way that is going to be successful, that is not predatory, that builds, you know, that is by a developer, a development partner that is well aware of the potential pitfalls and the need for homeowner education. And so we would be striving, again, you know, those details we haven't figured out, but that in, but we would never propose to, you know, we would never ask you to approve the funding availability and or the, you know, the cycle for 2022 if we didn't make sure that those pieces were a part of what we reviewed for. So absolutely, these are all fantastic points and really important things. You know, we are not going to be the babysitters of the project any more than we are when we make funding awards through LHIA through Minnesota Housing. We would have a grant agreement with the city that would have criteria, and the city would have a development partner, might be a county. 2 of the land trusts in our region are operated by county community development agencies. So they are frequent applicants to Minnesota Housing Super RFP for their land trust. They could and have expressed interest in this program because now they can apply for cities in their counties that do not qualify because there's not enough transit, that would never get funded through Minnesota Housing. So I want to reassure you all that we have worked really hard to understand this needle we're threading, and are really, trying to set this up for success. And that I don't think we'll get a lot of applications, at least in the first year, from a lot of folks that we haven't already awarded applications to through the Super RFP, to be honest. And we've been meeting with a lot of those folks as well. I'd love to see how the program could potentially expand to be a great opportunity for small developers to start, new smaller developers to start with a couple single family homes as a way to build capacity as a developer. But I think that's too much burden to put on the first year of the pilot. So, we're going to, if this goes through, LHA is going to be here, and single family awards through LHA are going to, happening for 25 years, and they're going to continue to happen. And we'll use a lot of the same internal mechanisms to administer the program as we already do. This is really changing just what's in the application and how it's scored and evaluated in a way for us to be a little more targeted in what we're prioritizing.
Thank you. Yep, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Well, it's been said 3 times already. I'll just say it the 4th time. I love that land trust model. I know I think you've already talked to some of the land trusts, and so 2 thumbs up on that.
Well, thank you. Further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, Tara, Ashleigh, who's going through the final slides here, please? Ms. Johnson.
Just that final next step slide. And Tara kind of covered this a little bit. The staff will return in November, December with any changes to eligibility requirements, any changes to proposed scoring, and additional scoring criteria for the committee's consideration. And we hope to have our thoughts on funding availability shaped up a little bit more. The goal is to have the pilot program ready for approval in early 2022, so around February, as Tara stated, and include that as part of the greater LCA, FDP, or fund distribution plan process. And Tara, did you have any thoughts on the next step slide?
Ash, you read my mind. It's like we rehearsed this, but we didn't. She just knows me that well. Absolutely. I just want to thank everyone so much for this feedback and let you know that, there were a lot of things here that we've thought about that we didn't really, a lot of things were put out here that we are going to make sure we are bringing back, more information on. It was really interesting, the conversation. I just got some material from Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity today that shared that the typical homeowner spends about $167 a month on maintenance and home improvements, and that in addition to homeowner costs is still 10% less than the average renter pays. Now, I just saw this today, so I haven't dug into, are they talking about the nation or the world? But these questions you've asked have been so great and make me want to go in and dig in even deeper and come back with more information so you all can feel good about the decision you make. And so we're just really, really grateful for your engagement and your questions.
Thank you for that, Ms. Beard. We look forward to hearing more and seeing as this plan develops. Ms. Johnson, thank you for your work on this and for your report today as well. Council members, anything else on this pilot, homeowner pilot? Yeah, good job, Councilmember Rosales. All right, seeing none, before we adjourn, I know that Councilmember Vento had an announcement she wanted to make. Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to share that we got an acknowledgement from Washington County, the folks in the park division there. Washington County has 4,400 acres of parkland. They have extraordinary, 2 extraordinary trails and a number of regional parks throughout the county. And as you might recall, I went on gushing about the great event they had in June to note the opening of the Revere Landing, this beautiful facility at the Revere Regional Park in Cottage Grove. So they sent this beautiful plaque, and I wanted to share it with you. I'm hoping we can maybe hang it in the council lounge, because it's a way of acknowledging an important collaboration. And I want to note that MPOSC and MPOSC Chair Tony Russo and the staff who do so much work with the parks also deserve a lot of credit. So thank you, and thanks for letting me make this announcement. Washington County's pretty extraordinary when it comes to their parks. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Bento, and I see Emmett Mullen is on the meeting applauding, as is Councilmember Lee. Very cool. Are you in that photo, Councilmember Bento? The ribbon cutting?
I am. Unfortunately, I am.
Oh, I
Yeah.
can't wait to see it in person.
Yeah, well, it was a beautiful morning, and the Washington County folks do just such a great job of not only planning and preserving their parks, but also really celebrating their parks. And I think that's a big piece of all of it, is really celebrating it and making sure people know that they're there and that they're open to all. I have dear friends who spend a lot of time in the parks de-stressing in the midst of this pandemic, and I actually hope to get there, if not tomorrow, maybe toward the end of the week, with a four-legged roommate who loves going to the parks. Thanks.
Very nice. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lee puts into the chat, go Lake Elmo, with I can't even count how many exclamation points. Anything else from committee members? Councilmember Landstrom.
Oh, Mr. Chair, on this point, right before this meeting started, we were chatting about some various home improvements, and all this past week, my floors of my home have been redone and sanded and stained and all this stuff. The reason I bring that up is because for 4 days, I have not been able to stay in my home, so I have been staying in a pop-up camper at Lake Elmo Regional Park with my family, and going to work and shuttling kids to school and camping at the same time. And Lake Elmo, a year ago, I spent $35 on an annual park pass, and that's the best $35 I have ever spent. The amount of time I've spent out there with like this weekend with the turkeys, a red-tailed hawk that landed right by our pop-up, with the bluebirds. It's just a very special place, as are many of our regional parks.
Great. Thanks for sharing that experience and for that endorsement. And I noticed the difference in your background, Councilmember Lindstrom, so I was kind of wondering. So thanks for the explanation too.
I'm banished to the basement right now.
Oh. And let's see, committee members, anything else? Director Barajas or Michelle, anything?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Great. Well, seeing no business before this committee, we're adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week.